Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now, in today's episode, of course, we are continuing on with this rehash, obviously, of the hillside where the old tunnel used to be, which, of course, is in preparation for the extension to the railway platforms. So before I get started with today's episode, I just thought I'd like to say a big, massive thank you once again to all of those who've left comments and feedback from the last episode. Of course, the previous episode was more of a philosophical approach about my methods of railway modelling and sort of railway modelling in general. So, you know, there was a few sort of debatable items in there that I sort of thought would create a little bit of conversation and possibly potentially some conflict with certain people and so forth, but generally it was really to sort of explain my own sort of background, my own ethos around my layout and all of those types of things. So as I said, thank you very much for all the comments and feedback. I hope to, as I've always said, endeavour to respond and reply to some of the feedback and comments that, of course, have been left over many videos. So in today's episode, I was going to tackle the scenery, so start getting into the scenic treatments of this area where the tunnel has been backfilled. Now, I do, to a degree, I at least get it prepared with some base scatter, but there was one aspect to this backfilled tunnel, and actually not really the tunnel itself, but actually one of the bridge abutments and the adjoining bit of hillside that was there from the original days. So this part of a kind of cliff face where the road goes down, and the more I looked at it, the more I sort of wanted to do something about it. It wasn't quite sitting right, so I kind of got sidetracked once again, and it was a case of doing a little bit more surgery in this hill area to sort of straighten it out and reform part of this hillside. So I think without further ado, let's just get into what I got up to. So I'm just making a few more modifications here because I kind of felt that what originally was a kind of a rocky cliff face here that had a bit of a bulbous sort of appearance to it probably looked okay when the bridge span was still here, but now that this is, it just didn't quite look right. So what I'm actually just doing is adjusting this profile here so that instead of having this bit of retaining wall or buttress like that, it'll kind of return just a bit, so it's similar to this end. So it'll have a return sort of going back just a smidgen, so that it sort of looks like there's corners to the buttress at both ends. So this hill was created, or this sort of cliff face was created many, many years ago in an old technique of chicken wire, and of course then what I did is actually stretched over or glued over old bed sheets. it was very much in the days when I sort of recycled whatever, anything we could find or I could find. So the bed sheets were then stretched over and glued around the edges, and then I went over it with plaster of Paris. It was, you know, no sculptor mold or anything like that, and it was certainly before I started using that the high density foam stuff that I predominantly use now. So but this used to be really the common method of building hillsides back in the day for model railways, was to use chicken wire, and usually it was chicken wire and paper mache, but I just used to use sheets, and then I'd sort of go over it where there wasn't. This is quite thick plaster I've used here, but in other areas what I did is just mix together kind of like a plaster of Paris and paint, you know, sort of like the household primer paint, and that sort of created this rigid finish to it. So I've just taken this back. What I'm going to do is I'll probably, because I don't want to break any more of this, so I'm just going to even up this edge here and just trim through that. I'll just use a saw or something. It's quite tricky getting in here. Then I've got to really kind of cut this back and cut a section of this out as well. So, and then what I'm going to do is just pop in a block of high density foam and then carve that to the actual shape that I want. So what else can we cut out of here? So I'll just carry on making my surgical procedures to some very old construction techniques on this layout. Right, so I've now finished hacking away at this, and we've now sort of got this other corner, which was what I was wanting to achieve. So we're just going to see just a small piece of it. It's not going to be not as dramatic, of course, as this corner here, but there will be just a smidgen that's going to poke out here. I'll do a MDF return back into here a little bit, and then of course once I've done that, I'll cut a piece of high density foam to fit into this position, glue that down, and then once that's set, then I can carve it and shape it to the form that I want here. And what I might try and do is maybe even try and, with a little bit of creative carving on the high density foam, can I possibly mimic this sort of rocky texture that's here. Right, so I've cut out a little bit more around this area and actually brought this back even further, and what I've actually done is cut a parallel line through here, because obviously the side buttresses would be parallel with each other. Well, I would assume sort of maybe most commonly they would be. And I've also cut a straight line here, and straight as possible down here, because basically I'm going to fill this area in with some high density foam, and of course it's just going to be easier to be able to cut straight lines in that and get it to fit. So basically what I've done is put in a piece of paper in under here, tucked it underneath this bit of road, popped in this side component for the buttress. This is a new component, and then just sort of traced this area roughly in order to cut out the foam shapes. So we've got this piece here, bit of MDF, couple of different layers there, that's going to go on there, and we'll butt that up against that edge. And then I've just made up a little wee block of MDF for here. So this is to fill in this corner here. Now this is actually where the girder section used to be, but which wasn't really entirely accurate as far as I'm aware. So I'm actually going to build this up, this piece here, and maybe hack a bit of this away, so this is kind of partially fallen to pieces and so forth. So once that's done, we'll glue this in place, then glue that in place. Then what I'm actually going to do, as I mentioned I think in the previous episode, was to wrap this entire structure again in the engineer's brick, so the blue brick, so that the buttresses here match the tunnel entrance. And of course the same will happen here on this side here. This is going to have to be wrapped as well. So it's going to be a little bit tricky wrapping this, because of course I'm doing it in situ. So basically what I'm going to have to do is create some templates, because of course the road is on a slope, we've got angles up here and so forth, so it's going to be a bit tricky in that sense. So we've got our chunks of polystyrene here, and of course once the brickwork's all done, then I can actually slot these in, and I've made them as snug as possible to fit into these spaces, so we've sort of got no gaps, and basically we can just sort of fill this area in. So that is the base piece, and of course then we've got 2 more layers on top of that, and they're just going to be glued down, and I'll put some weights down on that. And once this is all set, then I can actually start to recarve this and shape it to more how I want it to be. So that's the plan. So I think the first step is I'll at least get these side buttresses glued into place, and we'll rewrap this entire bridge buttress area with the blue brick. So as you can see, I'm now hacking away at this chunk of high density foam and bring it into basically its new hill formation. So as you saw in the previous clip, I had prepared the buttress here with, of course, the new blue brick texture that's now in place, and also gluing in these additional bits of side buttress components. And we can now go through and trim this out. So with that brickwork there, of course, you saw me, I'd made up a paper template first and basically trimmed and folded it to fit pretty close to what it should be. And once I was happy with that, then I laid that out over a bit of the brickwork and trimmed the brickwork out to the same shape. And of course that's on the printed label paper, which of course has the matte spray varnish coat over the top of it. So yeah, it went down reasonably well, and of course some imperfection areas will get hidden by foliage and other scenic materials, so it doesn't need to be absolutely spot on. So yeah, it's a bit tricky cutting this one because I'm having to do it left-handed, and you probably figured out by now that I'm actually right-handed. So this is just happens to be one of the most awkward positions to have to trim. And of course the thing is, I've got to be very careful here because I really don't want to wreck the printed brickwork on this edge here. So I've got to be so careful where I cut and where the knife ends up going. So yeah, so this is a very, very difficult angle. So I think probably what I'll do is I'll carry on with this and then come back to you when I've got it to a formation that I'm happy with. Right, so we've now formed this into its new shape, and it's looking a lot better. I'm much happier with that, because the original piece used to come out sort of about here, and it sort of had a bit of a weird kind of hump in it around here. So cutting this back, and now we can actually see the bit of buttress on this side, and I'm not sure, I will have a go, see if I can mimic this a little bit, but I think I'll probably actually have a reasonable amount of foliage and overgrowth and things on here as well. Maybe further down the bottom is the rocky texture, but as we get further up, maybe there's more foliage. But I think the shape's certainly looking a lot better, and the profile of the whole hill now I think is improved and looking a little bit more convincing, resembling an old bridge buttress, an old railway line, and a filled in tunnel. So I'm now spreading over basically a base scatter, so it's essentially what's on the other side of the road there, and it's just a good foundation before things like static grass and other foliage and so forth goes on top. And this is probably as far as I will get in this actual episode, so the static grass and so forth will come in the next episode. And the reason being is the surgery that took place here. So that is now complete, as you can see, and once of course the high density foam had been carved to the shape I wanted, then I filled in the gaps with sculptor mould, or the homemade sculptor mould that of course was used in this whole area as well. It was then sanded and smoothed out, and while I was at it I completed the blue brick texture on the other side on this buttress here, and of course I did a bit of weathering. So applied a bit of weathering to the tunnel portal, or what's left of it, what you can see of it, and also to the bridge abutments as well. So they've got a dusting of weathering powders, and then that's all sort of locked in. I managed to sort of be able to spray a little bit of the matte clear varnish over the weathering powders just to lock it in place, and it certainly improved the appearance as well. It certainly does look like it's been there for a long time. It's well used, maybe it's a line that's at the time in the 1960s, maybe this line had been around for 100 years possibly, something like that. So with that all done, of course, now it's just a case of doing this base scatter over here, and of course it'll be good too because I can let this fully dry before I start applying static grasses, shrubs and so forth. And I am considering something running down through here like a bit of a worn track, like as if people have, possibly along this way here, people have managed to sneak in and walk down and tried to get into the tunnel, possibly. So a bit of a beaten path here, not a proper track, but at least some indication that people, trespassers, have tried to get into the tunnel portal. So this is just blended turf, earth blend, Woodland Scenics product, and I find it's quite good. It's quite a neutral tone. It's neither sort of winter, it's not summer. It's sort of a bit of everything in there, so it sort of creates that quite a good sort of neutral base. So I'll carry on and finish off this base scatter and come back to you when it's all done. Right, so that's got the base scatter applied to this part of the hill. I haven't done this side here yet because I think I may do the ballasting here first before we get into that, and then of course there's the platform in here, so that's going to cover most of this. So it was just concentrating on this side and getting it ready so it can now thoroughly dry before we get into applying static grasses and other foliage and so forth. So I'm thinking of sort of shorter overgrowth around this area, and also down here as well, maybe there's shorter overgrowth and maybe things cascading down from this abutment as well. So that of course we will get on to in the next episode. But it's certainly starting to take shape, and it's now that we've got this base scatter on here, and of course it now sort of aligning a little bit more with the other side of the road, and we can sort of get a better sense of the remnants of this old railway line and some of its protruding infrastructure. So as I said, it's starting to take shape. So there we have it. This area is now ready and waiting for some further scenic treatment. So this of course will be the static grass and overgrowth and other bits and bobs of foliage. So this will definitely take place in the next episode. What I also do hope to start getting into in the next episode is actually starting to plan out these platforms and hopefully be able to actually look at some of the station buildings, what my plans are, and a particular station that I hope to be able to actually base them on. So there we have it for today's episode. I certainly hope you've gained some inspiration and ideas for your own layouts, and maybe even actually gained a bit of confidence into ripping up a piece of pre-modelled layout that you've never been happy with and dive in there and actually fix it up or change it to something that you would much rather have. So with that said, I'll sign off for now. Do take care everyone, look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.